All right, we are going to start with Chapter 2 today. Here are some of the big definitions that we would have. Make sure that you write those down before we begin. And if you take a look at for the Declaration of Independence, this is listed on page 630 to 632 in your textbook, and the U.S. Constitution is on 618 to about 629. So if you want to look over those, you certainly can get a better understanding of those different documents. All right, so taking a look at Chapter 2, Chapter 2 is going to go over your constitutional rights. Section 1, we're going to have the foundation of the U.S. Constitution. Section 2, we're going to talk about the division of balance and power of governmental powers. And then Section 3, we're going to look over the Internet and constitutional rights that relate to that. Okay, so Section 1, the goals that we're going to have. We're going to identify the documents written in the course of the nation's founding. We're going to explain how the U.S. Constitution addresses and protects citizens' civil rights. Okay, so the first documents that helped form the United States. So what we're looking at first of all is the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration of Independence was signed on July 4th, 1776, and basically it brought all of the original 13 colonies that we had in the United States together, and they met and basically formed a document which would kind of be the founding of the nation. There were different things that kind of came in place after this, but basically it charged King George III of England with some of the past issues that they had with him. So some things such as trying to have too much power over his country, trying to have too many rights over the colonies in the United States, and different things like that. So again, if you want to look at the Declaration of Independence, it is on page 630 in the textbook. Okay, the next thing that we have is the Articles of the Confederation. The Articles of the Confederation is basically when the 13 colonies decided to form a nation together rather than just 13 individual colonies. So this happened in 1781, and it brought all of the states together. So looking, if you want to follow along in the textbook, there were a few different things that were listed out in there. So it's kind of looking at founding the United States Congress, looking at the House of Representatives, the Senate, and different things like that. It's putting term limits on the presidency, on different government positions, such as a representative, such as a senator, and things like that. And again, you can review the rest of those in the book. It is on page 26. Moving on to the next part, we have the U.S. Constitution. The U.S. Constitution was drafted in 1787, and it basically put together 7 articles that helped found the framework for our government. Again, this happened after the 13 colonies came together, and we're looking at putting in, the 7 different sections that kind of established the country. It wasn't really until this time that the country was official. And some of the important things that we had in the U.S. Constitution were the different rights that we had. So the Bill of Rights is basically the first 10 amendments that are going to be in the Constitution. So we have more than 10 amendments now, but these were kind of the basic rights and liberties that you would have as a U.S. citizen. Okay, so looking at the Bill of Rights, we have 10 different amendments here. As we go through each of these different amendments, I'm not going to read through each of them. If you want to pause the video and read them before we kind of go through them, I would certainly recommend that so you kind of understand what's going on. And I'll explain a little bit more in depth for each of the different amendments. Okay, so looking at the First Amendment, the First Amendment was basically what established that Congress will have no laws with respect to your religion, prohibiting free exercise of or abridging your freedom of speech. So basically it's giving a lot of individual rights that you would have. It also gave the right to assemble peacefully. So when we were talking about in Chapter 1 with civil disobedience, as long as you assemble peacefully, you are protected under Amendment 1 of the Bill of Rights. Okay, Amendment number 2. This is one of the big amendments that often comes up for a lot of different controversies. So looking at Amendment 2, it is basically giving you the right to bear arms. Now, some of the issues that you run into on where kind of Amendment 2 stands with respect to the rights of citizens, back in the 1700s, early 1800s, most guns and weapons and things like that were large rifles, things that you wouldn't be able to carry around, and different issues like that. So if you look at today's age, a lot of people that say that they have the right to bear arms, they may be using rifles that they can fit, concealed carry that they have underneath, their shirt, coat, something like that. So those are some of the issues that you run into. There's a little bit of problem with the Bill of Rights when you're looking at it in the past and when you're looking at it today. Some of the things that they couldn't even comprehended back in the 1700s is completely different from what we see now in the 2000s. And that's where some of the issues come up, why there's a lot of debates on these types of topics, because it's not always easy to say that we're following the Constitution, even though the Constitution may have changed over time. So we'll discuss Amendment 2 a little bit more in class on Monday. Okay, looking at Amendment 3. Amendment 3 is basically saying that no soldiers in a time of peace may be quartered in your house. What that means is that after the war was kind of completed, oftentimes generals and soldiers and things like that would basically come and stay in people's houses as a way to be protected from the elements, things like that. So imagine if there was a war going on in North Dakota, soldiers would be able to come and stay inside people's houses where it's warm, where there's protection from the elements and things like that. Basically, Amendment 3 said that in peacetime, you are not allowed to quarter anyone, so no one is allowed to stay in your house through the government's will. Amendment 4 is looking at your rights for search and seizure. Basically, what you would see with this is, if you've ever heard that you need to have a warrant to enter someone's house, this is what your protection is underneath Amendment 4. And there's different ways that the police are able to apply this to what they're looking at. For example, if something is happening in a house where they seem to assume that there's an immediate danger or threat to someone, they would have the right to come in. But if they want nothing more than to just look around, you would have the right under the Fourth Amendment to have them get a warrant. So an example of this that you may have is if you were pulled over for a speeding violation by a police officer and they asked if they could look around in your vehicle, they would be required to have a warrant without good reason to search your vehicle. So as an example, they couldn't open up your trunk and see if you had anything illegal in there. You're protected under the Fourth Amendment, that there needs to be good and probable cause for them to have to search for something, so you don't have any unreasonable searches. And then the seizures aspect of this is just looking at they're not allowed to take anything from you without a reasonable kind of act. Okay, looking at Amendment number 5. So Amendment 5 relates to what you have for kind of court cases. So when you're looking at Amendment 5, you're given the right to basically not incriminate yourself. So what that means is that when you are found for a crime, you have the right to plead the fifth. You are not required to explain, the decisions that you made. You're not required to incriminate yourself. So what that means is take all the blame for something. You have the right to be heard at a jury, heard in front of a judge, and things like that. And then there's a few different other parts that go into Amendment 5. But mostly what you're looking at is that you are not required to incriminate yourself. Okay, Amendment 6 relates to your right to a speedy and public trial. So basically what this means is if you are accused of something, some sort of crime, some sort of civil suit, anything like that, you are given the right to have a speedy and public trial. So what this means is if you are, again, accused of something and the court decides that you are not going to be heard for the next 5 years, that would be a violation of Amendment number 6 because you're not given the opportunity to be heard in a speedy manner. You also are given the right to have a public trial. So that means that the government can't just have a private trial where no one is able to see it. There's no media that is able to know what's going on. And there are some ways that this doesn't necessarily show up in the public. For example, if a minor has an incident, the minor is not required to have a public trial because they are underage. Okay, so Amendment number 7 is looking at suits related to common law. So this is looking at disputes that you would have between one individual and another. If the controversy exceeds $20, then you are given the right to have a jury. to be heard and have a decision made on that. Now, when you're looking again with Amendment number 7, is $20 really that much in today's day and age? So this could be example if someone knocks your phone out of your hand, that would easily be worth over $20. Now, if you're looking back in the past, back in the 1700s, $20 would probably be a lot more money than it is today. So this is again one where you're looking at some issues of whether it should be updated or not, or how you want to kind of look at that. But Amendment 7 states that if it is over $20, you have the right to a jury. Okay, Amendment number 8 is looking at that there can be no excessive bail, there can be no cruel and unusual punishments related to something that happens. So as an example of that, just an extreme measure would be if you stole bread from a grocery store, you could not be executed for that. That would be an unusual and cruel punishment that you would have. Now, this relates a little bit to some of the, again, controversies that you see with issues regarding capital punishment. Capital punishment is when someone is executed for a crime that they have committed. Usually it's something that is so out of line, so such as murdering someone, that they deem that there should be an execution for that individual. So again, this is going to be something that we're going to look at a little bit more in depth about how capital punishment relates to cruel and unusual punishment. Amendment number 9. Amendment number 9 doesn't necessarily give any rights to any individuals. Basically, it is just kind of explaining, again, that the Constitution is not being constructed to take any rights away from people. It's just kind of an amendment that is explaining a little bit more for the Constitution. A lot of people kind of interpret it to mean that if there's something that you can't use one part of the Constitution to go against another part of the Constitution. And there's different ways that kind of relates to that, which we'll also be talking about a little bit more in class. Okay, and then finally, Amendment 10. Amendment 10 is basically saying that anything that is not expressly written out in the Constitution cannot be delegated by the federal government. So anything that is not listed again in the Constitution, the states have decision over those issues. So what we're looking at there, so a big event that has kind of happened is the legalization of marijuana. An issue that you would see there is that states want to have the right to determine if it is legal or not. And then the federal government is kind of saying that no, it is not legal in the entire nation. But since it is not written out someplace in the U.S. Constitution, there's a lot of issues where they say that the federal government is going against Amendment number 10. You'll also see this with rights for gay marriage as well. A lot of states want to have the final decision on whether it's legal or not for gay marriage to happen, whereas when you're looking at kind of the federal rights, the federal government essentially came out and said that this is a right for everyone, whereas the individual states are saying that they should have the right to decide that on their own due to Amendment 10. Okay, so here's our first checkpoint. Again, if you could pause that and write the answer to this question in your Bell Work Journal. All right, looking at the next part of the section, we're looking at some of the civil rights that we have. So civil rights, what we're looking at, civil rights are the individual rights that are given to people of the United States based on the Bill of Rights, based on the U.S. Constitution, and so on. Okay, so when we're looking at some of our different civil rights that we have, the due process of law. Due process of law basically means that you have the right to go to court, that you have the right to be heard, and the different parts that you would see through the Bill of Rights, it's listed out in, basically five different amendments that we have. So when we're looking at the Fourth Amendment, you have the right to against unreasonable searches and seizures. Amendment number 5, you have the right to not be a witness against yourself in any criminal act, so you're not required to incriminate yourself. And then we have Amendment number 6, where you're looking at the right to a speedy trial. Amendment 7 states that if a dispute is over $20, you have the right to be heard. And then we have Amendment 8, where you're looking at no cruel and unusual punishment. So the due process of law is a big issue with why the 13 colonies originally kind of separated from England. So when you're looking at the due process of law, a lot of the issues related to the king kind of determining that he had too much power to determine what was right and wrong, rather than being heard through a judge or jury or through the people kind of having their say. So again, a lot of what you see in the Bill of Rights is related to kind of our court cases and the rights that we have as individuals. Okay, the next part is we're going to take a look at the abolition of slavery. So that means basically eliminating slavery. This is something that we're going to talk about a little bit more in class. Basically, this took place throughout the Civil War and kind of a lot of things that happened there, which you'll be learning more about in your history classes if you haven't done so already. And again, this is something we'll talk about more in class. Okay, next we have the right to vote. The right to vote, there's been a lot of different parts that have kind of gone into that. The right to vote, originally, people of color, people who were minorities, were not allowed to vote. And this kind of changed, through the civil rights movements that happened in 1965, and kind of before that as well. So in 1964 is kind of when the big civil rights movement began. And even though slavery had been banned for basically 100 years, they were still not given the right to vote, even though the Constitution and the government basically stated they were U.S. citizens. They were still not given the rights of U.S. citizens. So that's a lot of what the civil rights movement kind of came about, was how they wanted the rights and liberties of each individual, no matter the color of their skin, their background, and things like that. So now when we're looking at some other reasons that people weren't given the right to vote. So back in the early 1900s, so it was around 1920, there kind of began a big movement to get the right for women to be able to vote. Since before then, women were not allowed to vote. So when you're looking at it today, that seems like it could be kind of ridiculous. But back then, there were a lot of reasons why they kind of claimed that that was the right decision. Now, it's not fair to say that people who are citizens of the United States, there's no difference between people based on their gender, based on their the color of their skin, anything such as that. So they wanted to kind of change the rights for that. Amendment 15 was the one that kind of took away the rights of women to vote. And then we had Amendment 19, which basically brought the rights back. And again, this occurred in around 1920. And Amendment 19 stated that the right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. Okay, so the next one that we're looking at is the denial by age. So there's a few different things that you were looking at for the denial to vote based on your age. So back in, again, kind of the mid-1900s, you would have to be 21 to be allowed to vote. And kind of the movement that sort of changed the age to vote down to 18 was when you were looking at how they were drafting individuals who had turned 18 to go to war, that they were kind of requiring them to fight and potentially die for the country, even though they were, under the age of under the age of 21, so they were not given the right to vote. Now, it doesn't seem fair that if your life is basically put on the line to fight for your country, you are not even given the right to basically be heard. You are not given the right to vote on whether or not you should go to war. You're not given the right to, vote on anything such as that. So when you're looking at the issues of lowering the voting age down to 18, it was mostly based around the kind of requirement that individuals who were the ages of 18 to 20 could potentially be required to go to war. So in 1971, Amendment 26 was passed, and it gave the right to vote to all citizens who were age 18 and older. Now, when you're looking at some issues of kind of laws related to persons who are 18 or older, a big one that you'll notice in today's age is kind of the right to drink. And this is something that we'll talk about in class as well, a little bit more on either Monday or Tuesday. Okay, so when we're looking at peripheral rights are things that are not basically mentioned in the U.S. Constitution or in the Bill of Rights. Now, there's different ways that laws are kind of enacted and put into place. So you may have things that are taking place through case law, through the judicial system, and things like that. But basically, with peripheral rights, you're looking at some other rights that are given to individuals. It's not taking rights away from individuals. Okay, so our final checkpoint for this section: how does the Constitution address and protect citizens' civil rights? Okay, and after you finish that, what we're going to do to prepare for class on Monday, I would like for you to take a look at page 26 and read a little bit about the hot debate. And if you also have the time, I would like for you to just kind of glance quickly through the Declaration of Independence and kind of the U.S. Constitution. Again, those are on pages 618 for the Constitution, and then we're looking at page 630 for the Declaration of Independence.